You're listening to the Skylight Books podcast. We're an independent, general interest bookstore putting great reads in the hands of people in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hosted by resident Skylighters, we're here to bring you new and exciting author conversations, group reads, and bookseller chats. Happy listening.
Hello and welcome to the Skylight Books podcast. You're listening to our special series, Lit Angeles. This is episode 3, where we will be discussing The Revolt of the Cockroach People by Oscar Zeta Acosta. My name is Emily VanKoughnett.
I'm Alena Saunders.
Oh my god, hi Alena.
Hi. Now I feel like I'm talking abnormally loudly because we just were having a conversation about how I mumble.
I think it'll be good for you.
I think it'll be good.
Yeah.
Talking loud.
Yeah, we got to get our booming podcast voices going. Yeah, so today we're discussing this book, Revolt of the Cockroach People. What was your knowledge of this book?
Okay, before we decided to read it.
Yeah.
Very little. So somebody who works with us at the bookstore, when I first moved to LA about a year ago, actually was telling me about this book, and they were saying like it's a cult classic in LA. It's it's like a huge part of LA lit culture. And I was like, okay, cool. And then promptly forgot about it. And so that was basically the only
That's it.
Yeah. And that's really it. Like you hear about all these kind of like Hunter S. Thompson, and I mean I hear about Michael Hare because I love Michael Hare, but like all of these kind of new journalist, gonzo journalism stuff, but you don't actually hear that often about Oscar Zeta Acosta.
Yeah.
Unless you're here in LA.
And so I heard about this book from our upcoming guests, Arturo, Ernesto Romo, and Sesshu Foster. And they cited it as an important book to them because it is about being Chicano, in LA, and it's a super political book. But I think even hearing about it from them, I didn't realize who Oscar Zeta Acosta was, and he is a goddamn legend and not talked about. So the first thing we want to do in this episode is kind of to get into not only the ethos of this book, The Revolt of the Cockroach People, but also into the author himself.
Yeah.
He only really wrote 2 books in his lifetime before he literally disappeared
in 1974
in Mexico.
On
a boat.
They still don't know.
Was it the government or was it the drug cartels?
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
Or did he just vanish? But we all know it was one of the 2.
Yeah, it was. I think maybe FBI.
Yeah, FBI.
So.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, well, it's also right after this book came out.
Right, and
this came out in 1973.
Yeah, and it was 74 that he went missing. Yeah. So
mysterious. Next up, we're going to start a podcast on conspiracy theories. So this will be the first one we really get into.
This is bridging the We're just using this podcast to get to our other podcast.
But Alena, who was this guy?
So this guy, lawyer, incredible writer. So he was born in 1935 in El Paso. His family moved to California. His parents
to Modesto.
Yeah. His parents picked peaches until his dad got a job in the Navy. I don't know if that's how you say it. He got a job in the Navy. He joined the Navy.
He joined the Navy.
And so I was reading this article about him in the New Yorker, and it was talking about around that time, his mom starts calling, whose name is Juana. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Sounds great.
Yeah. She starts going by Jenny, and his sister in this article kind of talks about how, there was an erasure of heritage there, how,
it's an assimilation.
Exactly, that's the word.
Which we'll definitely touch on later, but it's this assimilation of
which
Mexican
he goes into
culture,
in the book No, I think he goes into it in his first book.
Yeah.
A bit more, but he goes into it in this book quite a bit.
Yeah, so he wrote 2 books. The Revolt of the Cockroach People is the second one, but we decided to read it because it is the most set in LA.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Acosta joins the Air Force, and there he becomes kind of like a Baptist preacher and missionary.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of has like this breakup with God or with Jesus. Not breakup, but he actually literally writes a letter of resignation to Jesus.
That sounds so on brand.
I love. Yeah, it totally is. So I feel like I'm just listing things.
No, I love this. This is good. And then so he comes back from the Air Force and to the US, and that's when he's like breaks up with God, because he kind of starts getting back into partying, gets into doing acid, and then starts hanging out with like, in the first book, I think, not that I've read it yet, but he struggles a lot with like his Mexican American identity, his Chicano identity amongst a bunch of white people and in this like really white culture.
Yeah.
And he becomes a lawyer.
Yeah.
He like finishes school, he becomes a lawyer, and then he works at what's it called?
The Inquirer. Examiner. The Examiner.
I was what is it like when it's a law firm, but it's like for the people?
So he studies creative writing and then works at the Examiner, and then after he passes the bar in 1966, he works at for the East Oakland Legal Aid.
Legal Aid. That's what I was trying to think of. But yeah, so he like goes through this journey where he like is like on a pretty solid path, but then starts to get radicalized. I think he was always pretty radical, but I think like reading about him, you hear from everyone that he's just like a big presence.
Yeah, and you can kind of tell through like the snippets of like dialogue that we get from his life. Like in that New York article, they quote from his resignation letter to Jesus. And it's just like very, very funny and very out there. Yeah. Like he seems
and that's
very
how
wild and like energetic.
And that's how he falls into the crowd he falls into, which is that he basically becomes best friends with Hunter Thompson. Yeah. And that's how like everyone is going to know him the best, is that he is in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Like he is a character that Hunter Thompson creates.
Dr. Gonzo.
He's Dr. Gonzo. And so he like falls into like, kind of that same, he like basically not invents, but like Hunter Thompson stole a lot of stuff from him, and like, he like creates this like the Gonzo journalism and like all this stuff in a lot of ways, but mainly he does a lot of acid. Yeah. And fucks a lot of white girls. Yeah. All that. Leading into this book, The Revolt of the Cockroach People, is like why we wanted to start there instead of like with the book itself, because who he is so important to like what this book is.
Yeah, because this book is essentially just like a fictionalized version of the 3 years he spent in the Chicano movement.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So, like, it's important to kind of understand the man
behind it and how he barrels into this world. Yeah. Because that's, like, how he does everything, is he barrels into it.
Yeah, he's very, like, unapologetically energetic.
Yeah, and I was, like, reading this thing about his dad, too, that was, like, saying that his dad, and him used to like argue a lot as kids. Like his dad would encourage argument, and so it's like maybe that's how he became the man he was.
Yeah, I would love to read that first book because I think it goes much more into like how he kind of got the mindset that now we are experiencing in this book. Mm-hmm.
And he renames himself, right? Like he's like, his business card says Buffalo Brown. Yeah. There are all these things that are like really important, I think, to understand about his identity to then like step into this book. But so the basic idea of this book is, it's not basic at all. It's very large scale.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. But it is this man, Oscar Zeta Acosta.
Yes.
Buffalo Brown, Zeta, Buff, Z. What else? I'm trying to think of all the names he goes by.
I don't know. Buff stuck with me the most.
Buff is good.
Buff.
Yeah. And so he gets to East LA. It opens it goes through a lot of things, but he gets to East LA and he falls into being a lawyer for the Chicano movement. And throughout the book, he goes through like 3 or 4 different large political moments in the Chicano movement that then he ends up defending. So you see him both in action in the protests and then in action at the trial, which is like, he is an interesting lawyer, to say the least. He's a non-traditional lawyer, but he basically sticks with these guys through the movement until he like burns out. And that's like the essential plot of the book. There's a lot in the in-between. Yeah. But it is like a deeply political book about this really huge movement in LA that I frankly knew nothing about.
Yeah, same. That was really something that I was like a little embarrassed by. I was like, oh, I really know nothing about this movement. And do you want to tell us a little bit about the movement?
Yeah, for sure. So having read about it now and of course, like in this book, he's like a little chaotic and he's also not like deeply entrenched in the history of it.
For sure. Yeah.
So like you kind of only like experience the narrative that he presents.
Yeah. That's the interesting thing about this book is like,
it is in fact fiction.
It is fiction, air quotes, but it's like so much. I mean, it's so much not fiction, but like that's what's kind of interesting is that you're kind of thrown into this world, and so it's not like a typical nonfiction book where you have an explanation, really like a clear explanation of like what's going on and why and what people want and what they're asking for and blah blah.
It makes me think of so many things about this book that like become really important. But just like first, just like as a point, I think that this is a huge book in the Chicano like literature renaissance.
Yeah.
And he becomes like a huge writer in that era. And it's because like it almost feels like this is so I can't say it, but I'm gonna say it. It's like it feels like when you read like a book by an author of color in high school and then you have to like go in and like look up all the words, but like the Chicano Renaissance like allows people to like write in Spanglish and like write in a way that would be confusing to us as like white readers. And
I was meaning more like the historical context.
No, but I just like but like but like I just mean that in like a general sense that it's like actually finally bringing like this culture to literature. And then it can be like widely written. And that just ties into the history of this, which is like wanting to like basically the Chicano movement started to, as we were talking about briefly, like avoid assimilation. Because like the way that after like the Mexican-American War, like the way that like states were created, as often happens with like border politics, is that some people end up on one side of the border or the other. Or you end up in the US for whatever reason, but then you're just supposed to like assimilate. And so like the Chicano movement was so much about saying like, no, I don't want to like ditch my Mexican identity. I want to hold that. And then like to start creating things that like actually cater to the Mexican people that live in America. And not have it be about assimilation. So they're like there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in Texas. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening in Colorado. All this stuff that I don't know that much about because I didn't research it as much. But the first big thing that we see is this, I'll just go like chronologically. So it's like the East LA walkouts, also known as the blowouts, created, it was like this walkout from the schools that happened because people were realizing that these communities, the Chicano communities, were getting a worse education. They had like terrible dropout rates. They were getting like the educational programs were being like forcing them kind of into being laborers and like domestic workers, and like so much less about pushing them to be more than what we often what the U.S. has pigeonholed Mexican Americans into being.
Yeah.
So they protested. A bunch of people walked out. Students, parents, faculty.
Yeah.
And 13 people got arrested. And then Acosta eventually represented them.
Yeah.
Case number one. He got them all acquitted in the end.
Yeah.
And you see this all in the book, and it's like, he's a madman. Like, there's no other way to put it except that he's like,
it's really wild. Like,
it's not like he's like just a normal man on the stand. Like,
no, it's not like a normal lawyer. It's not like a lawyer drama, you know?
No.
It's like really, it's almost like the scenes of him in the courtroom are actually completely like they're interesting, but what's interesting is him in the courtroom. Like I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I'm trying to say something.
I mean, it's like you're not watching like a procedural. You're watching like...
Yeah, it's not about the courtroom. It's about him in the court. Like, him in that environment.
And he gives you like a great insight into like how he's going to like kind of work the room and like work the rules. And you can tell he's like... Not to reference the movie and musical Chicago, but he's going to razzle-dazzle them. Like, he's going to... He's gonna give him the old razzle dazzle, but like, you know, Brown Buffalo style.
Yeah. Well, it's also kind of interesting. Like, well, I don't know. I don't even want to say this. No, never mind. That's a cut that, Mick.
Cut that, Mick.
Okay, go on.
And one of the ways, in like another way that I think he's really an interesting lawyer in this book is with the next big case, I believe, that he does, which is the Basel 21. Basil?
I keep saying Basil. It might be Basil, but it's Basil.
Well, you guys, it's a church, so you decide which way we should be saying it. But so it's Christmas Eve. I'm painting a picture.
Yeah, the picture.
Oscar Zeta Acosta has already tried to get his little like employees, little interns.
Yeah,
basically they're like already, and these are things where I'm like, is this fact or fiction? Who knows? But his little interns are like, hey, we need more money for school. The Catholic Church is supposed to be paying for our school, and so he goes down and tries to like get the Catholic Church to pay more. And this is where I'm like, this is probably not true, because he's like wasn't like a big schemer overall. Like he had his role in it, but he wasn't like the spearhead of the Chicano movement.
Yeah, not at all.
But so they go down, and it's both like the Chicano movement, like I think a lot of the civil rights movements of its time has factions. They have like militarized, non-militarized people kind of in the middle. But they go down to the church on Christmas Eve and want to just go to the service. And of course they aren't allowed into the service, but it's like a ton of people. Yeah. And they end up like, and all they're doing is trying to like demand that money is more evenly spent from like, not just like they just built this huge new church.
Yeah, they had spent $3 million.
$3 million on a new church,
constructing a new church, as opposed to giving that to the communities
to like serve. The poor, which like is what what Jesus would want you to do.
Be Christ-like,
and like knowing that he was like a big Christian before is actually really interesting.
Yeah, I think so too, because I think that would I feel like it would irritate him more to see this kind of like those kinds of abuses happening. Yeah. When he, at one time had a very close relationship with, I mean, I don't want to speak for his close relationship with God, but I figure if you're a preacher, you probably have to have something going on. Yeah. But like that would irritate the shit out.
Or he got bored. He was like really not for the military life, so he picked up something else where he could like
Yeah,
pontificate. I don't know.
Well, we don't
respect.
I'm we're speculating, but no, actually, in that article I read that after he kind of resigned from the church, he was like, he had a really hard time with it.
Oh yeah.
So I'm like, okay, whatever.
So like maybe he really did believe in God.
Either way, he's the kind of person I think the hypocrisy of that would irritate him.
Yeah, and I think that's like, I forget where I read it, but his main thing was like that he really hated people who were lying to him.
Yeah.
And so like, I think you could view so many of these politicians and like leaders as liars, and he wanted to like
totally
overthrow that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this whole Christmas Eve church debacle ends up with 21 people getting arrested, so they become the Basil 21.
Basil 21. Yeah.
And he ends up representing them in court again. And so like while he's in all these protests, everyone's like, no, don't do anything. Like, you stand back because you're a lawyer.
Yeah.
So like he can be a great like human megaphone, like he's great at giving speeches at protests, but like a lot of time when it's like actual action and like when it comes to the police and the protesters butting heads, which it always does, he like has to take a step back, and I think he feels really conflicted about that because he feels constantly caught like between this like I almost like between like being the like acid hippie that he is and like also the like revolutionary Chicano, and he wants to do both of those things.
Yeah. Well, also like kind of the professional lawyer who has like this job to do, but also he wants to like, he wants to be active in the fight that he's fighting.
Yeah. And so he like doesn't want to be the man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So 21 people get arrested. Mm-hmm. He ends up getting half of them acquitted. And I think this is where he runs for sheriff. Yeah. So much happens in this book.
There's so much. And also, like, a lot of this book has, like, a very kind of interesting timeline. Yeah. It's not actually, like, in chronological
It's not chronological order. Yeah. And it's not even, like, it's not like he neatly wraps up one trial and moves to another trial. It's like there's all these things in between.
Not at all. But I think it's after he's having trouble with the Robert case.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the Robert case, and then he decides to run for sheriff.
Right. So the Robert case is like not as often talked about.
No, because it's kind of this like it's
just a small thing. So his family had approached him to help find out if their son who died in jail was murdered or if he committed suicide, because he quote unquote committed suicide according to
the sheriff or
the people who jailed him. Yeah. And as we all know now, it's really sketchy and like all like there's a lot more criticism of this. I do love that every turn of the books that we're doing, the cops are the definitive enemy.
This is true. I love this.
Let's continue. Let's keep it going.
There's a through line here.
The cops are bad in this. But yeah, so he ends up eventually after there's like this really powerful scene in this book where they do the autopsy of the boy.
Oh God, yeah,
it's so brutal. But that was like really when I got invested in this book, and I think really when it all started hitting so much harder.
Yeah, that was like a difficult.
It's difficult because they're like, so he has to go in with the doctors performing the autopsy.
Yeah,
and like based on the before death and then pre-mortem.
Sure, yeah.
But like based on the bruising, they have to like go in and like cut out the bruises.
They like exhume his body, and then
he has to like
because
Zeta has to like decide which pieces of flesh they're gonna cut.
Yeah, it's really
bad.
Rough. Oh my gosh, yeah, that was one of like the more disturbing things I've read in a novel in a while.
Yeah,
it was and I read that book about cannibalism, like. This was a hard one to get through.
Yeah. I'm just going to read the thing that he says at the end of the chapter after this autopsy. And when it was done, there is no more Robert. Oh, sure, they put the head back in place. They sew it up as best they can. But there is no part of the body that I have not ordered chopped. Forgive me, Robert, for the sake of the living Brown. Forgive me, and forgive me, and forgive me. I am no worse off than you. For the rest of my born days, I will suffer the knowledge of your death, and your second death, and your ashes to my ashes, your dust to my dust. Goodbye, essay. Viva la raza.
It's really...
It's like...
Yeah.
And then you like really... Because like there's points where you just feel like he's like court jester.
Yeah.
And then you like this was like... I was like, oh, he's really like... This isn't like a... Like, he's not in this just to be in this for the moment. Like, he really feels this.
Yeah. There's a lot of, like, and that's something that we were going to talk about, too, is kind of this, like, fictionalized nonfiction thing. Because I think it changes the way that you approach, or it changes the way that I approach reading a novel when I'm like, okay, this is a novel, but it's actually, like, mainly based off of somebody's real life, and it's in first person and all this stuff. But I think he does a really good job of kind of balancing out like those moments that like really emotionally can hit so hard and are so like quick and written really well. Yeah. And then there are other times where you're kind of like, who is this guy? What is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's a point where there's like a lack of editing, of course, because it's
no, but I don't even mean like a lack of editing. I just mean like
or like editorial. I don't know.
There's like, you know, like. I think that it could be argued that there's like a fair amount of like ego going on,
of course,
in this, and like, but then those moments of like real emotional honesty and like it just makes those all the more powerful because you're seeing like, oh, this writer is like so aware of his own like tendencies in his own mind in terms of like kind of talking himself up and blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly he gets to like a very heartfelt, real moment like that. And it just makes that kind of even more powerful to read.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like he's what makes him so compelling. It's just that he's like a kind of person that I could never be. Where it's like this level of like, it's not that he's so selfish because I don't think that he is. I think he must be in real life. I think he must be like a selfish person.
Yeah.
But to be all of these things and to live so loudly and like, is something that like I can never imagine. So like writing a book like this about myself could just like truly not happen because like
he's so unapologetic.
Unapologetic.
Like I think there's a story again in that New Yorker. I read other things besides the New Yorker article, but it had some good stuff. Yeah. But there's I think a story about him like carving Zeta into a stall in the bathroom in the Rolling Stone magazine.
Yeah.
Like, whatever.
That's amazing.
So I'm like, at 31, I want to be doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, just like do it. I mean, I think if I went into the Rolling Stone bathroom, I would do that. That feels like a safe space for that.
I don't know, man.
In the last and final trial that we have to talk about, was for this big movement where it was like ended up being like 20,000 people.
Yeah,
30,000. I've seen like two different numbers, but it was the like Chicano moratorium. It was the like March Against Vietnam.
Yes,
because shockingly, more brown people, especially like the largest population dying in Vietnam was like the Chicano population. Yeah. They were getting drafted heavily because they weren't going to school.
Yeah.
And they were poor. So it's really easy to get caught up in the draft and then die in a stupid war.
Yeah, it's what's also wild because I mean, maybe it's just because we don't have the draft anymore, but like you don't think of it in terms of like, oh, these dropout rates of these high schools are 45%. I think is like one of the worst ones. Yeah. And that could literally mean life or death. You know, if they're not graduating from high school, they're not going to college. If they're not going to college, they're going to get drafted. Like, that's a wild, that's
great.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so, you know, people noticed and people were like, this is super unfair. And so 20 to 30,000 because the numbers are unclear.
Yeah.
People showed out to march for this, and it was supposed to be, they went to Laguna Park.
Yeah.
And they marched, and they were supposed to be peaceful, and then shocker upon shocker, like the cops came and made it violent, and like there were riots, there was looting, and the big thing, many things happened within that, but some folks headed to a bar, and one of them was this reporter, Ruben Salazar, who in the book is known as Zanzibar, and he was like the foremost reporter on like Chicano politics for the LA Times.
Yeah, I think he was one of the first reporters to be covering that particular beat.
Yeah, and he was like, they threw a tear gas container into a closed space.
Yeah.
Claimed it wasn't closed. They claimed it was like, or no, it wasn't closed. It was open.
It was open. There was like a curtain.
There was a curtain.
But it was also, I think it was
fishy.
Well, and it wasn't like a normal tear gas container that you use to disperse crowds, which you just throw. It's one that you shoot.
Oh, you shoot. And so they shot it right into his head.
They shot it into his head. Yeah.
Yeah. So he died. And so Acosta is left defending the people who started this protest.
Mm-hmm.
And in turn kind of himself. And like has to deal with this death of this guy that he really admired.
Yeah, and also kind of trying within that trial to prove that it was premeditated by the LAPD.
Yeah.
So that,
and there's like, obviously there's like all this minutia that we can't get into, but the cool thing he does is he like calls all of the judges, like all of the judges in LA, he subpoenas all of them, and they have to come in, and like this case goes on for like years.
Yeah.
And like a year, like at least over a year.
At least over, I thought
maybe 3 years, I think. Like a long time.
It's a lot of information.
A lot of information, and now we're just trying to tell you guys about this information, and I hope we're
making sense.
But so he calls in all these judges, and the judges are like, basically he's trying to find out, like, when you're creating a jury, are you doing it to represent the population that's here?
Yeah.
And the answer is no.
Of course not.
And like, because of this trial, they slowly start to make progress on that.
Yeah.
That they start to have more balanced juries in terms of who you're putting on a jury.
Yeah.
And in the end, like, out of, I don't know how many people he was representing that one.
I can't remember either.
It didn't have like a nifty number attached to it the same way the other ones did.
No. It didn't.
But he ended up, they all were let go except for one guy who got 40 days in jail for having a gun, which felt to him still unfair and unjust. And I just like how he's like, they all know we did crimes, but they did crimes too.
Yeah. And
like, just the way he was able to argue, like, to like charm the jury and all this stuff is like really incredible. And again, it's like, is it just because it's written by him, or was he really that amazing?
Right. Well, that's something that I mean,
we'll never know.
We'll never know. I mean, probably both, right?
Right.
He probably was very charming, and also probably, I think, like, when you're writing, especially about yourself, you're always kind of, I mean, I don't know, that's what I do. I'm always a little bit more charming and fun in my writing than I think I am in real life.
There's this like one part in it where, you know, this book is so different than other books we've read because it literally doesn't talk about Hollywood like at all. Like, it's such an East LA book. Like, it's like detached from the glamour.
Like, the biggest cameo, I think, for me was that
Liberace?
Girl. No,
the Manson girl. Yeah, there's the Manson girl show up.
Bruner, I think.
Yeah. The Manson girls show up at that last trial when they're subpoenaing the judges.
So funny. Oh my god. So good.
And no, but they go to that like big Chicano like
fundraiser
thing, and it's like all these actors coming out. It's like, hey, you know what? We're actually Mexican.
Yeah.
I know you didn't know, but like,
But
we're
we
Mexican.
are,
But there's like a point where one of them is like reading a part of one of his speeches, and he's like, just like kind of like daydreaming about how great he is.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah, he's like, off by fine words.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great speech.
You know what speech I really loved in this book is one at the beginning of, you know what, never mind, cut this. I should have made a note of which one I loved.
Well, I mean, we can just wait for you to find it.
I will not find it. I can't really remember what. Anyway, whatever.
There's so much.
But there are a lot of really good speeches in this book. I really loved when he went to visit his brother.
Oh yeah, let's talk about when he went to visit his brother in Mazatlan.
And
right? He was in Mazatlan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was like one of the. I thought this was kind of like the like, I don't want to say like stabilizing, but like this is where I felt him, the character, to be like most at kind of most with somebody who's going to like level him a little bit. And
yeah, it's like a foil.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Kind of like, okay, well, like what are you actually doing? So there's this one part, and he's talking about how he almost won for sheriff, which he did not end up winning. So this is him speaking to his brother. But look at what we did in the campaign. With almost nothing, we got all those votes. But what good is that? They gave you those votes, man. They knew you weren't going to win. They were just letting you guys get your rocks off. Well, what the fuck are you doing? It's easy for you to sit here sucking up dope and fucking those broads. What? And you're not doing the same thing in East LA? Well, yeah, but I'm also working. Bullshit. It amounts to nothing. It's just an exercise in ego tripping. I stare into the night. We are rounding curves and the car lights race across the jungle, striking the green trees and the red bush. I have just been wounded. Jesus is my twin. Jesus is my twin. Excuse me. Cut that, Mick. Got Jesus on the brain. Jesus is my twin, but he came out first. Our parents always called him the older brother. I have had to treat him with the respect that a Chicano gives to the eldest son. I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah.
I thought that's such like a great moment.
Like he really checked him. You know, like that's literally it.
Yeah.
Like he's just like, he's like, man, what are you really doing up there?
Yeah, and I thought that was I don't know why that just really struck me that like a lot of the time when we see this character in LA, he's really, I mean, like he is really admired by a lot of the people that he's surrounded with. You know, he's like kind of like the big guy, and he's very charming, and like people really believe him and like him. And this is kind of the one moment where we have somebody who's kind of calling him on, like, what are you actually doing? Like, what's going on? Like, what are you doing? And I thought that was a really nice moment. And the writing was really good too, I thought. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a great part because it's like he isn't the character. Okay, sorry, I have to take a moment.
No, take a moment.
Sorry, Mick.
We're struggling today, Mick.
I know this is really long. Sorry, Mick.
But here's I mean, like, I think within this book we see, like, with women, right? Like, every woman he sees, he's like, oh, like he like is like, oh, look at her tits.
Yeah, he's terrible towards women.
Okay, cut that part with the tits. Okay, let me just start from scratch.
Hang on.
Mick, we're starting from before when Emily said I need to take a moment.
Yeah, we're starting from that back there. I think what's really interesting about like this moment with his brother is that it's not within the scene that he's in. And I think even from there, because it's like immediately after that his friend, the reporter, dies, that you start to see him, while he thinks he's like a central part of this movement, he is like just a pawn. And so he can like play his part in it, but it starts to fall apart a little bit. Like, not perfectly, but like after this next big movement, he has to go. Like he can only do it for so long.
Yeah.
And I think they're like, we've been talking a lot about like you know, what a great lawyer he is and how amazing he is, but like he's clearly flawed. Like obviously it's not a great time for women still, like it's the sexual revolution, but like his relationship with women throughout this book is like hugely problematic. Like he literally dates teenagers. He literally dates 3 teenage cousins. And then he like goes around using a lot of like homophobic and like also other racial slurs, which like not granted, but like Hunter S. Thompson also did. So it was, you know, you could give credit to it being like a style of writing, but like, it's pretty something that people needed to grow out of.
Yes.
And now it's just immortalized.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that like was really striking to me in the book, is kind of seeing the like really intense objectification of women of all ages, including teenagers.
Young teens.
Like 14.
As young as 13. There was a prostitute in Mexico who was 16. Yeah.
So, it was very jarring and uncomfortable, and also it was difficult to read, especially because you know, he sees these women, he objectifies them, but then they all kind of end up falling in love with him or like really in lust with him, and so he gets every woman that he's created this kind of 2D rendering of. And that's like a difficult thing to read.
Yeah, and I think that, and like as upsetting as it is, I like the way I was thinking about it. I was like, damn, it's so clear that at so many points in so many movements, women were not considered to be
serious
parts of serious parts of that movement. And like this book briefly mentions Angela Davis and mentions so many other women in the Chicano movement who were doing great things, but he sexualized every single one of them.
Yeah.
And so it's like, whether it's like an aspect of like machismo, if it's like a lot of other things, like just general patriarchy and like the discrediting women, like it pops up all over this book. And so it's like, I think it's frustrating.
I find it incredibly frustrating because it takes you, number one, it takes me way out of the book. You know, like there were a couple of instances I was like, I just can't read this right now. I don't want to read this. And also, like, you know, you think about it, like, well, okay, this guy, the author, you know, has had meaningful relationships with women, but he's just not writing them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's a really frustrating thing to deal with as a reader and as a female reader, where you're like, okay, so you're being completely dishonest in this one category of this book, which is your relationship with women.
Yeah. I think overall it does still lack, like there's like not that level of vulnerability that you get. I think there are like a couple of women he has relationships with, like Alena towards the end, where you can see him soften a little bit more.
Totally.
But there's never like a full emotional vulnerability from him.
No, and there's never a full rendering of that character. You know, it's like, I think, you know, the first kind of, of the character of Alena.
Yeah. Oh, no, of course. Like all the women are 2D.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think, it's always going to be an issue with this book. Like, I don't think we're going to find a way to talk ourselves out of it.
No, definitely not.
Being a problem. Like,
I also think it's very of the time. Like, I hate when people say that, but like, it's just true.
I just did have to like move through this book being like, well, like that's just going to be that. And I'm like, and it's not goofy and it's not kooky and it's not funny. Like, I think just kind of looping it back, like, I think we did touch on this in talking about Eve Babbitts. That we were like, here is somebody who can be archaic without it being like, sure, she's like mean about some of the men in her life in a fun way.
Yeah.
But it's like in a fun way. And like she gives them depth. And like, so I think it is like, sorry, men, it's like a limit on men's imagination at this point in time.
Yeah, I agree. It's like a blind spot.
Yeah,
It's
they're
a
like
major
women
blind
wear
spot.
skirts and have tits, and it's really cool when they do badass things, but it's still cooler that they have tits.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's just still roping
but
it
I'm
back
still
to like,
going to describe the tit that is doing that badass thing.
yeah, exactly. Like, it's just like, she's like, and she did it in a mini skirt. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, it's
Like, she's aiding you in the revolution, but okay.
Yeah, that's really the thing. It just seems, I mean, it's, yeah, again, we're not going to talk ourselves out of it, and I think it's like widely acknowledged that that's an issue in a lot of like this era of men.
Yeah, exactly.
Writing,
And
like,
it's why
other
I'm like,
eras of men writing
frequently averse to this era of men writing.
Yeah.
But I think from this coming from a brown man and being like a deeply political book, which like I feel like we don't get political books enough.
Yeah.
That are about like revolution.
About
I'm
revolution,
like a novel about revolution. It's
Yeah.
like such a digestible way, besides the like points that make you want to
Yeah.
stop and close the book. It's like such a digestible way to like learn about this part of LA history.
It's also such a human way to learn about it. Like, because you can read all you want about like the statistics and blah blah blah, but like once you're, he like actually he does put you in there with him on the ground, and it's very fun to see. I mean, fun's probably not the right word, but it's very interesting to see to get a rendering of the people who were like doing this amazing work and like really had their whole hearts into bettering their communities,
Yeah.
So I think it's like the novel as a political tool, or not tool, but like a political rendering is really, I think it's good.
I think it's really great, like that it can, like I always think about literature as being the final form of history. Like there's the historical document, but then there's like literature as like humans' best attempt to capture something.
Yeah.
And this like flaws and all like really does capture the moment. Yeah, so this novel is just a really incredible like chunk of LA history, and again, it's like unlike what we've read so far. I think it's unlike anything I've like encountered.
Yeah.
As like a piece of like local history, like to immortalize this is really great. And I think there are moments that we miss in like revolutionary history that get lost with all the people. I'm going to go on a quick thing just because we've already been going so long. But like, with all the protests a few years ago, a thing that I was thinking about, it's funny to see like Angela Davis in this, and then Angela Davis now is like somebody who's like actually one of the few people to survive. But like, we don't have like Black and brown civil rights leaders from that era because they were all assassinated. Yeah. And like all killed by the government or whatever, but like we don't have those leaders. So I think to like consume this writing in any way that we can is like really incredible. And like, he was also killed by the government. I'm gonna side with his ex-wife and his sister on that, and not with his son who thinks it was the drug cartel.
I think it was the government.
I think it was the government.
I really do.
And I'm really excited to dive more into this conversation with our guests, Arturo Romo and Sesshu Foster, the authors of Dot, which is a really incredible novel about reimagining the history of LA. And they're the ones who got us excited about this book in the first place.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Yeah, okay, stay tuned, guys.
Welcome back. We are joined today by Sesshu Foster and Arturo Ernesto Romo, who are the authors of the book Dot, A History of the East Los Angeles Durable Air Transport Lines. Sesshu Foster has taught composition and literature in East LA for 20 years and recently retired.
His work has been published in the Oxford Anthology of Modern American Poetry, Language for a New Century, Poetry from the Middle East, Asia, and Beyond, and the State of the Union, 50 Political Poems. Arturo Ernesto Romo was born in Los Angeles, California in 1980. His artwork, mostly collaborative, mixed media works, but also drawing, has been circulated internationally. His art making is pushed through explorations on the streets of East and Northeast Los Angeles, which feed into an ongoing series of collaborations with writer Sesshu Foster. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
For being here.
Yeah, we're so excited. Yeah, so we're here today to discuss with you The Revolt of the Cockroach People by Oscar Zeta Costa, which I actually first learned about this book from you guys when I hosted your launch event for Iladat last year, and you cited Oscar Zeta Costa as one of your big influences for writing. So what is your relationship to this book and to Oscar Zeta Costa as a writer?
I think I first came to Oscar Zeta Costa's work through Sesshu. I think we had been creating a website called elaguide.org that explored hidden histories and people's histories of East Los Angeles, and he was featured and Oscar Zeta Costa was featured in one of the pages that was called, I believe, our influences or our patron saints of the tours. And so, but my experience with the content of his work goes back much further. I grew up in a Chicano movement household. Both of my parents were involved in the Chicano movement. And so the narratives and the memories and the history of Chicanismo and of that early mid to late 60s human rights movement called the Chicano movement was part of the way I grew up and was part of the stories of my family. So Oscar Zeta Costa, reading his work actually paralleled the book, like Revolt of the Cockroach People, actually paralleled the stories that I had heard from my family.
And I think I first came across Zeta Costa's books in small press editions from the Bay Area. I don't remember the presses that they came out on. They didn't come out on necessarily Chicano presses, but they came out on small Bay Area presses before they got picked up by, I think, Vintage or somebody later on. After Hunter S. Thompson made him gave him a race change operation and turned him into a 300-pound Samoan in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Which apparently pissed Zeta Costa off, and he threatened to sue, but then he disappeared forever without a trace, supposedly off the coast of Mazatlan in 1974. So there was no suit, and maybe he'll always be remembered as a 300-pound Samoan. Or Benicio del Toro, he'll be remembered as that. But I think that's symptomatic of the way certain writers of color, certain figures, political figures, and others are obscured, marginalized, and erased by history, turned into things that they're not, stereotyped or simply erased and used for the purposes of other people. And so Zeta Costa for me was one of those meteors that kind of flashed across the 60s, early 70s and disappeared, like Huey Newton, whose life time overlapped roughly, or others of that period who embodied a kind of zeitgeist, a spiritual turmoil of that period, of the history of that period, and then flashed out and disappeared. In Zeta Costa's case, disappearing literally. So yeah, he was interesting to me for that reason. He illuminates history from underneath, from the underground, from a participant's viewpoint, as opposed to, I will say, the recent excellent book by Mike Davis about LA in the 60s, which I read and I love, but I can't think of the title.
It's Set the Night on Fire.
Set the Night on Fire with
John Wiener?
I don't remember the other guy who wrote it, but I did.
Yeah, the UCI professor, history professor.
Yeah.
Who does a great show on KPFK, and I don't remember his name right now.
Yeah. I think it's John Wiener.
That's right, it's John Wiener.
Great.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great overview of LA in the 60s. Zeta Costa probably gets a mention in there. But if you read Zeta Costa's books, you get the feeling of what it's like to be walking in the streets during that time. And a little bit, and being sort of driven out of your mind by some of it.
Yeah, I think in reading it, I was really struck, and something we were talking about before, just was struck by like the power of it as a political novel, and how rarely, like whether it's a novel or it's real, like, how much of that is true, but like to get a political novel like this is really rare. Like it's not something I think I've ever really seen. And then to also have it be like this revolutionary story about the Chicano movement, which like I knew so little about, it gave me such like a it was such a gateway into it. And I just found that so specifically powerful. And yeah, just like really struck by like how that creates like a legacy for this work and for this movement. And I want more people to read this book for like that reason.
I think that's the power of narratives. Power of narratives is really to embody a spirit of a time, as opposed to, a list of sequential facts and causation and data, but instead, kind of like a dancer dancing, they show the body of motion.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you guys find, like, in creating Iladat, like that same kind of energy of like preservation, or like creating a narrative that allows you to, experience pieces of history? Because for those of you who maybe haven't been exposed to what is like a really incredible piece of work that you guys collaborated on together, it's like all of these pieces of LA history, real LA history, reimagined into a new history of LA, correct?
I'm going to step on Arturo's toes. We were driving around, we were researching the elaguide.org, which is still up. Arturo did the yeoman's work of HTML and inputting that website up there, and it has walking and driving tours of historical sites in East Los Angeles. And so we drove many days, I don't know how many hundreds of miles, but many days around and around Northeast LA and East LA, looking at various historical sites like Self-Help Graphics or the Community Service Organization offices, of the organization where Cesar Chavez got his community service training or community organizing training, and documenting them. And I know for a fact that Zeta Costa would come up every now and then, because we would wonder like, where did he stay when he was in East LA? Maybe he's still living in one of these houses that we're driving by and so forth. So he was like this mystery man spirit that kind of inhabited our quest, or like haunted our quest to look around at these historical sites.
Kind of like
Yeah, it's kind of in the same way that I guess like so the role that Zeta Costa played in our exploration of East LA is really similar to the way that narratives, stories, and memories of previous movements play, haunt, and are reenacted in current movements. So sometimes we're reiterating movements of the past, and the past struggles, stories of past struggles, and talking to elders about past struggles inform current struggle. But we're also always creating new versions of what we'd like to see based on current realities, but we're also reenacting or reiterating things that we've seen in the past. So in the way that Zeta Costa as a person or as an artist in relationship to community informed and haunted our work as artists in relation to community, I think the narratives that he left us, along with stories I hear from my family, or stories that activists hear from older activists, I think those are also operating on the same register. Like we are alive in history, and history is alive in us. And it's not just the history that Sesshu was talking about. Like, it's not just like dates, events, and occurrences and cause and effect. It's also like, what were people's spiritual embodied experiences of these events? And, our traditions of oral history get kind of like transmuted into the written word. And when I read Zeta Costa, I feel like I'm being told a story. There is like this oral history about it, complete with elaborations, exaggerations, left turns, and then kind of like the living language of Chicanismo at the time. So I think what Sesshu says about like the haunting is pretty accurate, not just for Zeta Costa as a writer or artist to us writers and artists, but also like movements continue on even after they've changed into other types of movements.
No, I'm just thinking now about kind of like what you said about kind of the spirituality of these movements. And I was thinking as I was reading it, that something that I think Acosta captures really well in this book is kind of like the spiritual aspect of these movements. And it's something that I'm interested in as well. Can we like air that out a little bit more? Because I think it's really interesting. How do you think he went about capturing that kind of spirit in the book? Because you can feel it, like it's an emotional book. How do you think as a writer, because I'm trying to be a writer, and so like, just as a writer, how do you think he went about doing that? And how do you all go about kind of capturing that potent emotion in your work? Is that a terribly large question that we are always struggling with as artists?
Oh, Sesshu has told me the answer to that one before, so I'll let him take it.
All right, you're up, Sesshu.
I guess so. Well, one of the things that my former neighbor, co-founder of the Brown Berets, Carlos Montes, told me about his lawyer, Zeta Costa, was that he was big, and he was kind of fearless. He was fearless in the sense that he wasn't afraid to get kicked out of court. He would yell in court. He would pound on the table. He would he would act out because I think he wanted to go the distance. You know, he wanted to make sure that that for better or worse, he was, you know, he wasn't just in the background, that he was fully participating, that he was there. And I think that definitely that sort of largesse, you know, that sort of overly large, and kind of like, you know, macho and mansplaining kind of largeness of spirit, of vigorous spirit, you know, explains why he kind of burned out and just shot through the scenes of the Chicano movement and exploded somewhere over the Sea of Cortez. But you know, I guess I'm trying to suggest that one way to you know, get to the forefront or to participate fully is to make sure to do what you can to go the distance and try to sort of go the final yard, the final inch, and be present. When we did a bunch of nonfiction work researching the ELA guide, and at the same time, you know, we were always joking and making things up in the conversation as we drove around, Arturo and I, and so ELADOT, the East LA Dirigible Air Transport Lines novel, is a kind of compendium of the characters we made up, from Juan Fish, whose actual truck is visible in and around Lincoln Heights, and other people like that, including Zeta Acosta, who we successfully interviewed as a ghost.
I was just looking over that today. It was like so great to see that after having read this book, and like I feel like you guys really, hearing that you guys were driving around pretending he was kind of in the car. We had been like, how did they capture him so well on the page? But
I was like, this
because he was
like
in the car with you. Yeah. I didn't realize it was the ghost that you were interviewing. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that all, like that level of like just capturing the spirit of LA and of the movement is really incredible. And I can't quite put my finger on why I feel so very moved by that, but I think it's just that like we do so much writing these days like doesn't exist within collectivism. It's so much about the individual, and so to see something that like is both history and personal and political, like I don't think you can do that outside of a like political novel, because you know the personal is political. So I think it starts to like hammer home that idea. But so I'm curious, I think, like what you guys like think of where this legacy of like Acosta has, I mean, like he was your neighbor's lawyer, like how has he like rippled through the East LA community and like seen now?
Yeah, I'm still thinking about that idea of like showing up and like that, like Sesshu says, kind of like trying to fill in space to be as big as possible. And I think of a video, there's like a film footage of a God, you're gonna have to help me, Sesshu. Raul Ruiz was what was he, editor of La Raza or a contributor?
Right.
Yeah,
Maybe he was publisher also.
a publisher.
Publisher of La Raza newspaper,
Yeah,
City Terrace.
and so during one of the Chicano moratoria against the war in Vietnam, a journalist named Ruben Salazar was murdered by the sheriff's department, and Raul Ruiz, I believe, was one of the people who took photographs of the moment that he was murdered. And so there's a video that's available on YouTube, I think, and I believe it's some type of inquiry or preliminary hearing or something about the investigation into the murder. And Raul Ruiz is on the stand showing the photographs that he took. And one of the things that I've heard people talk about, contemporaries of his, is like how empowering it was that he was just talking back. Like he was just talking back, and you look at the video and he's just on fire. He's not taking like any shit. He's just answering the questions. He's questioning the premise of the questions. He's calling out bias, and it's just something really powerful. And I think there was something about the Chicano movement that Zeta Acosta kind of fills in his own way, like his own like very idiosyncratic and personal way. The spirit of the time about like not withdrawing anymore, like to advance, to push, and to become more full into public spaces and cultural spaces, and to not be afraid anymore. And so I think that's one of the spirits in the book. I mean, I think it manifests in Zeta Acosta as a type of like recklessness, and like willful recklessness, and like striving to become a writer. Like he mentions early in the book, like he just can't wait to find the story. And then once he does, it's like, you know, all bets are off. He's just going to pursue it to the end. But this, like his desire to become a writer, his desire to transform into something, a more fuller version of himself, however problematic, is like one of the spirits of the book. But it's also one of the spirits of, I guess, any movement of people who have felt submerged. To me, it's a novel that's partly about emergence. And so I think that's what I feel is in the spirit of the book. And in terms of how his legacy today, I think not too many people know about him. And that's one of the features of being on stolen land, that's continuously stolen and continuously, like, you know, deracinated or like erased or something, is that we're continuously building and continuously being like stripped of our own history. And so people like Zeta Acosta and the Chicano moratorium and the Chicano movement as a whole are both embedded in the way that we think about our lives. Like it's transformed the way I live, and it's saved my life in a lot of ways. But then they're also like hidden. They're like these weird ghost stories or something like that, like hidden people, hidden stories. And so he exists on these multiple levels. Definitely exists on these multiple levels, like present but not present.
Maybe I can insert a quote from Carlos Montes here.
Yeah.
This is Carlos Montes. I interviewed him in December of 2013, and on behalf of the French edition of Revolt of the Cockroach People. And he told me, these white cops arrested me, they said, for assault and battery of a police officer. And I said, what assault and battery of a police officer? They charged me with throwing a soda can, maybe an empty soda can, at the police at a rally, because some cans and bottles had been thrown, apparently. If that was true, why didn't they arrest me at the rally? But they arrested me. Not only did they arrest me, they took the picket signs I had in my car and wrote insults on them, like dirty Mexicans or whatever, smashed the Chevrolet insignias on the vehicle, on the steering wheel. I pled not guilty, and at the preliminary hearing, Zeta Acosta came in carrying the picket sign, incensed, you know, complaining to the judge, throwing the signs on the table in the courtroom, saying that the arresting officers wrote these racial insults on the signs and tore up my car. The judge kept trying to tell Oscar, this is not the appropriate time or place for such a complaint. The judge would say things like, if you want to file a complaint against the police, you have to file it with the police, etc. But Zeta Acosta kept bringing it up. And when I saw Zeta Acosta throw the signs on the table, I was just thinking, go for it, bro. What other attorney does that? Of course, he yelled at me too. Zeta Acosta's strategy was always to fight it all, to go to trial and fight it all the way. We got into a big confrontation and he told me, I don't remember his exact words, but something like, you got to leave, because there was no evidence against the other 5 defendants in the Biltmore arson case, which, as an aside, was 6 people were charged on the testimony of an undercover LAPD officer that they tried to burn down the Biltmore Hotel while Ronald Reagan was speaking in it. So that's the aside. Carlos says, yeah, I was in a meeting with all the defendants. He yelled at me too, that we were all going to burn because of me. The only evidence was against me, he said. So he said, it was my word against a police officer, Fernando Sumayas, and who was the jury going to believe? So I had to leave, and I did. I got married in January 1970, and the next weekend I was gone out of the country, underground, living underground in Mexico and El Paso. And I didn't come back to LA for 7 years. A sort of a path that Zeta Acosta himself took in the early 70s.
Even in just listening to that, it's like I'm struck by like several things, but one being like how he like mutated that undercover cop into this book while not talking about that specific case, but he does use that undercover cop. So it's like this like mutated retelling of history, which is fine. You know, like that's like it would have been impossible, I think, to include everything he was a part of. And just
So for example, he changes Ruben Salazar into Roland Zanzibar.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious.
It's great. But I think it's like also just like to see him like really be such a touchstone for people and to like occupy this space to be able to like help people move through that. I think it's really fascinating. I don't know the point I was trying to make anymore, but
well, it is kind of like he's like epic, like almost like a mythic proportions, right? Where I mean, even from that segment, it's like you can tell he like embodied his whole life, you know, like he really, if he was for you, he was for you. And I think that's really, I think that's really powerful and inspiring myself.
He was like larger than life. And I think that's like absolutely, I think.
But then this book is really interesting because like as a figure, he is larger than life. And then in this book where it's like a fictionalized version of, you know, his life, you can see how very like flawed he is. And that's, again, like the most powerful part of literature to me is to see the kind of duality in the struggle, which is like inherently so spiritual. But yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm.
You know, I was thinking about your question of how Zeta Acosta sort of overlaps or continues on into the present day, into LA as it is now. And I was thinking about the former members of ASCO, the performance group, Harry Gamboa, Arturo, who are the others? Gronk,
Patsy Valdez.
Patsy Valdez.
Willie Herron.
Willie Herron. And how they also were as artists in East LA, denied access to LACMA. So they famously tagged LACMA and photographed themselves in front of their tag as a piece of artwork. And went their own way independently, did a lot of street theater. Many of their pieces are photographic documents of performance pieces that they did in the streets on Whittier Boulevard or elsewhere, downtown LA. And for me, they definitely went on to embody that rebellious spirit that Zeta Acosta recorded, the members of OSCO recorded, and the striking thing for me is, since you mentioned how does Zeta Acosta's legacy or influence continue on, those artists all continue on. They have continuing influence to this day. Harry Gamboa's collected writings under the title of Urban Exile was published by the University of Minnesota, I think it was. They all have, they're all still alive. And that's a major thing. It's really hard to produce if you don't live. And they produce, they show, they exhibit, and they're still active.
Yeah. I think the question I'm kind of left with is like, Alena and I both aren't from here. We both moved here I've been here for 3 years. Alena's been here for a year. And something that's come up time and time again is as we do this podcast is that we're both looking to learn more about LA history and understanding LA history. And because it's so hidden and looking at it as as the land is stolen again and again, as people keep coming here and acting like it's not, that it's a space of this one industry. I think a lot of people are left thinking that it doesn't have this rich, deep history, as illustrated through this one movement. And we've been seeing it through everything we've read so far, which is really the most special thing about this process so far for us, is just getting to dive deeper into that. And I guess the question I was leading into was just what is give me a moment while I find it. As these it's just the complexity of LA is so deep, and I find myself constantly face to face with it, but it's also so easy to ignore the complexity of this place. And I think learning about the Chicano movement has showed me, as with many other things in the city, that there's always protest and people pushing it forward, and it's the people who are actually from here. And the point that I'm getting to, there's a point, I think, is I'm just curious, with this book, I feel so moved by that concept and once again hit with that. And my question to you guys is just kind of what has the Chicano movement provided for your understanding of LA? Obviously, Arturo, it's a big part of your life, but I think just this continued if this was my city, I'm from Minneapolis, so I've gone through a lot in understanding my city's relationship to the cops many years over. And so I'm just how do you as a community member of LA from LA continue to understand like the erasure of this history? And then like, obviously through your art practice, this is like a huge part of your art practice, right? Is like preserving that. So I guess that's my question, is all of those things. Yeah.
There's like one of the ways that me and Sesshu, you know, I'm primarily a visual artist, although I do like use words in my work. And Sesshu does visual art also. There should be a book out of your visual art, your drawings, but he says no.
We say yes.
He's primarily uses words. He's a writer. But I think like where we've come together is like we're pretty committed to writing in relation to place. And I think that we both share this, maybe like a framework or a concept of we both share this framework or concept of place being like multivalent or something, like territory is like historical territory, and it's like internal territories also. So it's like dreamscapes and personal histories. And I think we're both committed to that. We're both committed to being artists of place, and like who write and create from places, defining places as you know, history, space, time, internal life. And I think like when you make that commitment as an artist, or when you start making work from place, that's like when you have to relate to place, you have to relate to other people and community. And I think that's how I've learned to be an artist, like both working with Sesshu, but also like learning from, you know, my parents and their storytelling skills and their artistic abilities. That one way that you belong to place is by contributing to place, and artists do that by authentically creating from it and honoring it. It's kind of like you belong to a place because you treat it with respect, and you treat the people that were there before you with respect, and listen to them. And so I think like that type of artistic practice, I hope that artistic practice is not so highly individualistic and self-serving. And that I'm not an artist so that I can like become well known, or I'm not an artist so that I can make something that's never been made before. I think that's something I was taught in art school, like all those like ethics of being like a genius artist or something. These Western frameworks, or like these Western market-based frameworks of creating like unique individual works. I think that stepping away from that or decolonizing that for myself has been important in my to be an artist that actually contributes to the place that they live in, and then finds greater belonging in that place because of it.
There's a curious sort of perpendicularity of my relationship to Arturo's work, because I feel like narrative is in some ways perpendicular to visual arts, in that you can kind of see a picture instantaneously, but a narrative, obviously you have to read from point A to point B, or to the end or something. A narrative therefore unfolds over time, and a certain amount of graphic information is just readily available to you in a picture, in a visual format, right away. And so there's a curious sort of tension or conflict between, that I like, between my forms that I work in and Arturo's. And what was I going with that? I'm not sure, except that that part of what we deal in are counter narratives, and I think we're trying to counter the narrative of Los Angeles being a city of amnesia, a city of forgetting, a city that is always new because it erases the past, and where people can come to reinvent themselves and become overnight successes or whatever. but instead, yeah, we are dealing in memory and history, memory and history. And because your life is, hopefully not just an instant, but takes place, like takes place is an idiom that has the word place in it.
I mean, I find that like very powerful, and I very much support that work. I would like that to be in my own work as well, that it's like based in these things. And I think like just kind of looping it back to the Acosta of it all, it is incredible to see his work embody that so much as well, that while he was like a traveling man, he was like rooted in this movement and this cause, and was able to like create something that lasted beyond him and his mysterious disappearance, which, yeah, like thank God these books got made, because we have I think, unless you're in like direct, like, unless you live within the community, it's like you're not going to get to find out, so it's like really amazing to have like a living, or not living, but like a thing that lives on. Yeah
I guess like one thing I think about too with his work and the purpose, or like the life it has currently, is that it's one narrative out of many. And I think it would be wrong if we saw Revolt of the Cockroach People as like the definitive Chicano movement novel. And I think, I'm not sure why, but because it's not as prominent as it could be, it hasn't achieved that status. I think it's, at least from my position, it's like one story of like many different stories I've heard about the movement. And I think that is actually really important, because by the framing, by Seth Acosta's own framing, it's like highly personal. It's like this very personal account. And I think it should be problematized, like there are like some very misogynistic, limited things about the book, that I don't think means that we dismiss it or we don't read it or something, but it does mean like there are other stories out there about the movement, and they take all these different forms, right? There's narratives about it, interviews about it, there's artwork about it, like Sesshu mentioned Asco, and Asco's work, like especially in that period right after the moratorium, was to a large extent about the experience of the Chicano moratorium and the Chicano movement, and so those stories are like constantly unfolding. There's like photo archives, La Raza newspaper archives, like all those things are like part of the narrative that documents this period in LA history. And so I think I'm comfortable with and happy Seth Acosta's work is there as like one of many narratives, I guess. I don't think I would want to see it as like a definitive account of our history, but I think it is an important piece of it. It's just like history speaks in all these different registers, and his is one of them.
Yeah, and I recall what Alena was saying about Zeta Acosta bears his own flaws in his prose, that his candor includes describing his own foolishness and limitations as a human being, in a kind of way that's sort of like a trickster. And I think that's really important, that tricksters can say things that due to candor and honesty, for example, the comedy of Richard Pryor can make points that, serious historians, they just don't never get around to. Like it doesn't, because it doesn't fit their register. Their they're going for something else, for a different audience, for a different purpose. And so Zeta Costa is engaging partly because of that register of being, like a trickster with candor and comedy and foolishness, as a definite part of what he's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like he exposes himself so like readily as, I mean, like that it opens the door to, like, especially us now knowing, like, reading about the women in that, I would just be like, well, I think they probably did far more than he, gives them credit for in his narrative, and that they probably weren't all falling all over him all the time. And it makes me just like so much more curious to learn so much more. But yeah, really, thank you guys so much. This has been really amazing. Yeah. So insightful. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.